There's a specific kind of silence that fills the heart of a child who waits for their mother's love and never receives it. It's not the silence of peace or contentment. It's the silence of a soul learning to survive without the one thing it needs most. This isn't just emotional deprivation. According to Carl Jung, this absence creates a psychological fracture so profound that it reshapes the entire architecture of who we become. What happens when the first relationship that should teach us we're worthy of love instead teaches us we're not? What occurs in the depths of the psyche when the person meant to be our safe harbor becomes our first experience of emotional abandonment? Jung discovered that this absence doesn't just hurt, it fundamentally alters the way we navigate every relationship, every challenge, and every opportunity for the rest of our lives. You might think this is about blame or dwelling in the past, but Jung's insights reveal something far more profound. He uncovered how the absence of maternal love creates specific psychological patterns that can be recognized, understood, and ultimately transformed. This isn't about victimhood. It's about understanding one of the most powerful forces shaping human consciousness and learning how to work with it rather than against it. If you've ever felt like you're fighting an invisible battle, if you've wondered why relationships feel impossibly complicated, if you've achieved external success but still feel empty inside, then understanding Jung's perspective on maternal absence might illuminate patterns you didn't even know existed. This knowledge has the power to change not just how you see your past, but how you create your future. Before we explore these life-changing insights, if you're someone who values deep psychological understanding and practical wisdom for living more authentically, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. This channel is dedicated to exploring the profound truths that can genuinely transform how you experience life, and each video builds on these foundational concepts. Now let's discover what Jung understood about how the absence of a mother's love changes a soul forever, and more importantly, what this understanding means for anyone walking this path. Carl Jung made a revolutionary discovery that changed everything we thought we knew about early childhood development. He realized that when a mother is emotionally unavailable, rejecting, or absent, something happens in the child's psyche that goes far deeper than conscious memory. The child doesn't just feel unloved, they begin to construct their entire sense of reality around the belief that love must be earned, that safety is an illusion, and that their authentic self is somehow fundamentally unacceptable. This isn't simply about having a difficult childhood. Jung understood that the mother represents what he called the first archetype we encounter, the Great Mother. This archetype carries the template for unconditional love, safety, nourishment, and acceptance. When this template is distorted or missing entirely, it creates what Jung termed a primordial wound that influences every aspect of psychological development. The child's mind, in its desperate attempt to make sense of maternal rejection, creates a devastating internal narrative. If my own mother cannot love me, then I must be fundamentally flawed. This conclusion becomes the foundation upon which the entire personality structure is built. It's not a conscious decision, it's an unconscious survival mechanism that shapes how the developing psyche organizes itself. Jung observed that children in this situation develop what he called a false self, much earlier than those who receive adequate maternal love. They learn to read emotional cues with hypervigilant accuracy, becoming experts at detecting what others want and need. They master the art of performance, creating versions of themselves that might finally earn the love they crave, but in doing so, they lose touch with their authentic nature. Modern neuroscience has validated Jung's intuitive understanding. Research shows that children who experience maternal emotional neglect develop different neural pathways than those who receive consistent emotional attunement. The areas of the brain responsible for self-soothing, emotional regulation, and secure attachment show measurable differences. These aren't just psychological theories anymore, they're biological realities that can be observed and measured. The absence of maternal love creates what Jung called a splitting of the psyche. The child learns to compartmentalize their experience, separating their authentic feelings and needs from what they express to the world. Part of them continues to long for mother's love, while another part learns to mock that longing as weak or childish. Part of them remains hopeful, while another part becomes cynical about the possibility of genuine connection. This splitting isn't a conscious choice. It's an automatic psychological response to an impossible situation. The child cannot reject the mother completely, because they depend on her for survival, but they also cannot fully accept the reality of her emotional unavailability because it's too threatening to their developing sense of self. So they create internal divisions that allow them to survive but at the cost of wholeness. Jung recognized that this early experience with maternal absence creates specific archetypal patterns that persist throughout life. The person may unconsciously seek out relationships that recreate the dynamic of longing for unavailable love. They might find themselves attracted to partners who are emotionally distant, critical, or inconsistent, unconsciously hoping to finally win the love they couldn't earn from their mother. Alternatively, they might go to the opposite extreme, becoming people-pleasers who sacrifice their authentic needs to maintain relationships. They learn to be valuable rather than lovable, useful rather than cherished. They might excel academically, professionally, or creatively, driven by an unconscious belief that achievement might finally make them worthy of the love they never received. The internal critic that develops in response to maternal absence is particularly harsh and persistent. Jung observed that these individuals often carry within them a voice that sounds remarkably similar to their mother's criticism or emotional unavailability. They become their own most severe judges, holding themselves to impossible standards and rarely experiencing genuine self-compassion. This internal dynamic creates what Jung called a neurotic split between the part of the psyche that still longs for maternal love and the part that has learned to survive without it. The longing part remains frozen in childhood, continuing to hope for rescue, while the survival part becomes hyper-adult, taking on responsibilities and emotional burdens that were never theirs to carry. The tragedy is that this split often goes unrecognized for decades. The person might achieve considerable external success, build relationships, and appear to function well in the world, all while carrying this fundamental wound that colors every experience. They might not even realize that the persistent sense of emptiness, the difficulty with intimacy, or the chronic self-doubt stem from this early absence of maternal love. Jung's insight was that recognizing this pattern is the beginning of transformation, not because we can go back and change the past, but because conscious awareness of these unconscious dynamics gives us the power to respond differently in the present. When we understand how the absence of maternal love has shaped our internal world, we can begin to make conscious choices about how we want to relate to ourselves and others. The path toward healing this primordial wound isn't about finding a substitute mother or trying to fill the void with external relationships. Jung discovered that true healing requires developing what he called a conscious relationship with the archetypal mother within our own psyche. This means learning to provide for ourselves the unconditional acceptance, emotional attunement, and nurturing care that we needed but didn't receive. This process of self-mothering isn't about indulgence or regression. It's about developing the capacity to recognize our authentic needs, to comfort ourselves in times of distress, and to maintain a compassionate internal voice even when we're struggling or making mistakes. It's about learning to be gentle with the parts of ourselves that are still wounded, while also cultivating the strength to face life's challenges. Understanding Jung's perspective on maternal absence reveals that the wound itself can become a doorway to profound wisdom and compassion. Those who have experienced this kind of early deprivation often develop extraordinary sensitivity to others' emotional needs, deep empathy for suffering, and a fierce commitment to creating the kind of love and acceptance they wished they had received. The journey from wound to wisdom isn't automatic or guaranteed. It requires conscious engagement with the healing process, often with the support of therapy, spiritual practice, or other forms of intentional inner work. But Jung's discoveries show us that this transformation is not only possible, but can lead to a quality of love and understanding that might not have developed otherwise. The absence of a mother's love changes a soul forever, but that change doesn't have to be purely destructive. When we understand the psychological dynamics at play, when we learn to work consciously with these archetypal patterns, the wound can become a source of strength, wisdom, and authentic connection with others who share similar struggles. One of Jung's most profound insights was how the absence of maternal love affects our relationship with what he called the anima in men and the animus in women. These are the contrasexual aspects of the psyche that represent our capacity for emotional connection, creativity, and intuitive wisdom. When the maternal archetype is wounded, These essential psychological functions often become distorted or underdeveloped. For men who experienced maternal emotional absence, the anima often becomes either idealized or demonized. They might put women on pedestals, seeing them as either perfect, nurturing goddesses or dangerous, manipulative beings who will inevitably abandon them. This black and white thinking makes authentic relationships with women extremely difficult because it's impossible for any real person to live up to these archetypal projections. The man with a wounded maternal archetype might find himself unconsciously seeking women who remind him of his emotionally unavailable mother, hoping this time he can earn the love he was denied. Or he might avoid intimate relationships altogether, convinced that all women will eventually reject him. Either way, his capacity for genuine partnership is compromised by these unconscious patterns rooted in his early experience of maternal absence. For women who lacked adequate maternal love, the relationship with their own feminine nature becomes complicated. They might reject traditionally feminine qualities like receptivity, nurturing, or emotional expression because these were associated with the mother who hurt them. Or they might overcompensate by becoming caretakers who neglect their own needs while desperately trying to earn love through service to others. Women with maternal wounds often struggle with what Jung called the negative mother complex. They carry within themselves an internal voice that is critical, demanding, and impossible to please, much like the mother they experienced in childhood. This internal mother continues the cycle of emotional deprivation from within, making self-acceptance and self-love extremely challenging. Jung observed that both men and women who experienced maternal absence often develop what he termed premature ego development. Forced to become self-reliant too early, they develop strong, capable personas that can navigate the world effectively. But beneath this competent exterior lives a child who never learned that they were fundamentally worthy of love and care. This premature ego development creates individuals who appear remarkably strong and independent, but who often struggle with authentic vulnerability and intimacy. They learned early that showing need or weakness led to rejection, so they developed elaborate defenses against being seen in their genuine, unguarded state. The result is often loneliness in the midst of achievement, isolation despite apparent success. The shadow work for individuals with maternal wounds involves confronting not just their own rejected aspects, but also the internalized negative mother that continues to live within their psyche. This internal mother might manifest as perfectionism, self-criticism, emotional coldness, or a relentless drive to prove worthiness through performance. Jung discovered that healing this internal dynamic requires what he called active imagination, engaging consciously with these inner figures and gradually transforming the relationship with them. This might involve visualizing conversations with the internal mother, expressing the anger and grief that was never safe to feel as a child, and slowly developing a more compassionate internal voice. The process often involves grieving not just what was lost, but what never existed in the first place. Many people with maternal wounds carry the fantasy that somewhere there exists the perfect, loving mother they never had. Part of healing involves accepting that this idealized mother was never real, and learning to find peace with the imperfect reality of their actual experience. Jung also recognized that the absence of maternal love creates specific challenges around boundaries. Children who had to earn love through performance or compliance often grow up with confused boundaries. They might be overly rigid in some areas while being completely porous in others. They might excel at maintaining professional boundaries while being unable to protect themselves from emotional manipulation in personal relationships. Learning healthy boundaries as an adult when you didn't experience them as a child requires conscious effort and often professional support. It means learning to recognize your authentic feelings and needs, distinguishing between what's yours and what belongs to others, and developing the capacity to say no without guilt or the fear of abandonment. The relationship patterns that emerge from maternal absence are complex and often contradictory. Some individuals become avoidantly attached, maintaining distance in relationships to protect themselves from potential rejection. Others develop anxious attachment, clinging desperately to relationships, while simultaneously pushing people away through their neediness or demands for constant reassurance. Many people with maternal wounds find themselves in what Jung called repetition compulsions, unconsciously recreating relationship dynamics that mirror their early experience with their mother. They might find themselves repeatedly attracted to partners who are emotionally unavailable, critical or inconsistent, hoping to finally resolve the original wound through these proxy relationships. Breaking these repetition compulsions requires developing what Jung called conscious suffering, the willingness to feel the original pain without trying to escape it through distraction, achievement, or dysfunctional relationships. This conscious engagement with suffering paradoxically becomes the pathway to freedom from unconscious patterns. Jung's approach to healing maternal wounds emphasized the importance of what he called individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, rather than who you think you should be to earn love. For individuals with maternal absence, this process is particularly challenging because their authentic self was rejected so early that they might not even know who they really are beneath their adaptive personas. The individuation process for these individuals often involves a careful archaeological dig through layers of false selves, people-pleasing patterns, and defensive strategies to discover what Jung called the true self, the essential core that exists beneath all the adaptations. This true self carries its own wisdom, its own capacity for love, and its own inherent worth that doesn't depend on external validation. One of the most healing discoveries in this process is recognizing that the child's conclusion, "I must be unlovable," was based on limited information and immature reasoning. The child didn't have the cognitive capacity to understand that their mother's emotional unavailability was about the mother's own wounds, limitations, and psychological struggles, not about the child's inherent worth. This reframing doesn't minimize the real impact of maternal absence, but it can free individuals from the unconscious belief that they are fundamentally flawed. Understanding that their mother's inability to love was about her own psychological limitations, not about their worthiness, can be profoundly liberating. Jung also emphasized the importance of finding what he called symbolic mothers, people, experiences, or even aspects of nature that can provide some of the nurturing and acceptance that was missing in childhood. This might be a therapist, a mentor, a beloved teacher, or even a deep connection with natural environments that offer unconditional acceptance. These symbolic mothers can't replace what was lost, but they can provide corrective experiences that help heal the wounded maternal archetype. Through these relationships, individuals can begin to internalize a more loving and accepting inner voice, gradually replacing the critical internal mother with one that offers support and encouragement. The spiritual dimension of healing maternal wounds often involves what Jung called the transcendent function, the capacity to hold paradox and find meaning in suffering. Many individuals discover that their early experience of absence, while painful, has given them unique gifts, extraordinary empathy, deep psychological insights, and the ability to offer others the kind of understanding and acceptance they longed for themselves. This doesn't mean the wound becomes a blessing in disguise, or that the suffering was worthwhile. Rather, it means that consciousness can transform even the most difficult experiences into sources of wisdom and compassion. The absence of maternal love, when consciously engaged, can become a pathway to developing what Jung called amor fati, love of one's fate, including its difficulties. The healing journey for those who experienced maternal absence is often long and non-linear. There are periods of progress followed by setbacks, moments of profound insight followed by times of confusion and pain. Jung understood this as natural part of the individuation process, the spiral rather than linear nature of psychological growth. What remains constant throughout this journey is the gradually developing capacity for self-compassion. As individuals learn to offer themselves the understanding and acceptance they never received, they often find that their capacity for authentic connection with others deepens as well. They become less desperate for external validation and more capable of giving and receiving love from a place of wholeness rather than neediness. Jung's vision for those who experienced maternal absence wasn't that they would become normal or forget their early wounds. Instead, he envisioned individuals who had consciously integrated their experiences, who could draw on both their wound and their healing as sources of wisdom. These individuals often become what he called wounded healers, people whose own journey through darkness gives them unique ability to guide others. The transformation that Jung described isn't about transcending human needs for love and connection. It's about developing internal resources that make external relationships more authentic and sustainable. When you no longer need others to fill the void left by absent maternal love, you can relate to them as whole people, rather than as potential saviors or sources of validation. Understanding Jung's insights about maternal absence offers hope to anyone who recognizes these patterns in their own life. The absence of a mother's love does change a soul forever, but that change can ultimately become a source of strength, wisdom, and authentic connection. The wound that once felt like a life sentence can become a doorway to profound healing and transformation. The key insight Jung offers is that we don't have to remain victims of our early experiences. Through conscious engagement with our psychological patterns, through the development of self-compassion, and through the gradual building of internal resources, we can transform even the most difficult beginnings into foundations for authentic living. This process requires courage, patience, and often professional support, but it's entirely possible. The absence of maternal love creates specific challenges, but it also develops specific strengths. Those who have walked this path often discover reserves of resilience, empathy, and wisdom they didn't know they possessed. What Jung ultimately teaches us is that healing is not about returning to some imagined state of innocence or wholeness. It's about integrating all aspects of our experience consciousness, including the difficult parts, and allowing that integration to become a source of authentic power and compassion. For anyone who recognizes themselves in this exploration of maternal absence, know that your struggle is real, your pain is valid, and your capacity for healing and transformation is profound. The absence of early love creates wounds, but consciousness and compassion can transform those wounds into sources of strength. The journey from wound to wisdom isn't easy, but it's one of the most meaningful paths a human being can walk. Jung's insights light the way, showing us that even the most difficult beginnings can become foundations for extraordinary lives of authenticity, connection, and service to others who share similar struggles. Your mother's absence may have changed your soul forever, but you have the power to determine what that change ultimately means. Through consciousness, courage, and compassion, you can transform your greatest wound into your greatest gift, not just to yourself, but to a world that desperately needs the wisdom that can only come from those who have walked through darkness and found their way to light. The path is long, but you don't walk it alone. Every step toward healing, every moment of self-compassion, every choice to respond consciously rather than reactively, contributes not only to your own transformation, but to the healing of the collective wound that touches so many lives. If this exploration has resonated with your own experience, consider sharing it with others who might benefit from understanding these patterns. Subscribe to continue this journey of psychological insight and practical wisdom. Your willingness to face these difficult truths with courage and compassion is already contributing to your healing and the healing of others who share this path. Remember Jung's fundamental insight: the absence of love in childhood doesn't make you less worthy of love now. It makes you someone who understands the preciousness of authentic connection in ways that others might never grasp. Your wound, consciously engaged, becomes a source of wisdom that the world needs. This is how souls are transformed, not by avoiding difficulty, but by bringing consciousness to bear on even the most challenging human experiences.